Heads up, spoilers ahead. The movie starts with a girl named Elisabeth entering a dark room where an old woman asks a few questions. Then a man behind the wood wall whispers something to the old woman. Then she say the man speak himself.
Asks, can the gentleman not ask for himself?
She agrees to spend 3 nights with a wealthy man to pay off her father's debts. Her mission ends once she gives birth to his child. The man, Charles, hides behind a wood screen and asks Elisabeth a series of questions.
Have you ever done anything like this before?
If she's healthy, why hasn't she married? Why would she do something like this? Elisabeth responds that she would sell anything she had to survive, though she understands that Charles only needs her for a short time. For the next 3 days, Elisabeth is kept in a secluded hotel. After done with the dinner, she goes to the room. Upon entering, she finds a well-dressed man waiting for her, looking nervous and sipping drinks during their small talk. He explains that they only have these 3 days together and that in 10 months when she gives birth, she will receive a large sum of money. However, the payment comes with one condition. She must keep everything a secret and never have any contact with the child. Elisabeth didn't say a word. A deal was a deal, and she had no issue with it. So she turned around and began undressing. The first night, she lay on her side in bed while Charles awkwardly went through the desired motions. Although they didn't talk, Elisabeth could sense that Charles was a gentleman, treating her with nothing but respect. On the second night, Elisabeth felt more at ease and even enjoyed the intimacy. But afterward, she couldn't help but cry. She felt ashamed for being with a stranger. Noticing her change in mood, Charles encouraged her to express her feelings. This marked a subtle shift in their relationship. By the third night, Elisabeth was confident enough to embrace her desires. Their last night together felt like a passionate goodbye to their 3-day arrangement. 10 months later, Elisabeth gave birth to a baby girl. But before she could even see her, the baby was taken away. The labor had been long and difficult. No mother can ignore her child, and over the years, Elisabeth missed her daughter more and more. Each year on her daughter's birthday, she wrote messages in her sketchbook, wishing her a happy birthday from afar. 7 years passed, and Elisabeth finally found out where her daughter was, so she arranged to meet her by becoming her governess. From the servants, she learned that her daughter's name was Louisa. Louisa was a lonely and stubborn child, having already chased away 3 governesses because she didn't want to follow anyone's rules. She spent her time locked away in the lake pavilion and refused to go outside. When Louisa first met Elisabeth, she was cold and dismissive, telling her to leave immediately. Elisabeth wasn't offended by her daughter's behavior. Instead, it made her even more determined to stay and care for her. The next day, Duke Charles returned. When he saw Elisabeth, he was shocked and demanded she leave right away.
It's taken me 7 years to trace my child. Don't ask me to leave her now.
We had an agreement. You had your money?
Though he struggled to hide his surprise. Elisabeth told him she couldn't forget her daughter's laughter or the events surrounding her birth. Charles was furious that Elisabeth had broken their agreement. But since the governess contract required her to stay for a month, he had no choice but to allow it.
A month? A month is an eternity.
Charles explained what had happened 10 years ago. His wife had been in an accident and was left in a coma. He had turned to Elisabeth to continue his family line, never expecting their paths would cross again. Elisabeth was determined to discipline Louisa and teach her well.
You will obey me whether you want to or not.
Servant, 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 servant.
To do so, she sometimes did unusual things, like pouring paint on her face to show Louisa the consequences of her actions. Her approach was that whatever punishment Louisa received, Elisabeth would take too. Elisabeth's goal wasn't just to teach Louisa academics, but to help her emotionally. Louisa had been neglected for most of her life and lacked a mother's love, which made her rebellious. On her first day of lessons,
I know how to do what you say. You're just a servant.
Louisa refused to learn and arrogantly insulted Elisabeth, calling her poor and uneducated. In response, Elisabeth locked Louisa in the classroom, ignoring her cries for help. Charles, unable to stand his daughter's distress, angrily demanded that the lessons be stopped. But Elisabeth was determined. After spending 2 days with Louisa, she realized the girl had been neglected for a long time and didn't understand herself. Elisabeth knew that Louisa needed to learn discipline and promised Charles that whatever punishment Louisa received, she would also endure it. Reluctantly, Charles agreed and reassured his daughter before leaving. True to her word, Elisabeth followed through. Louisa continued to rebel, refusing to eat dinner and even wishing Elisabeth dead.
I won't. I'll die first.
How will you die? How will you make your body stay underwater?
Accepted the insults and jokingly suggested ways Louisa could kill her. After some back-and-forth exchanges, Louisa's resistance started to fade. She became interested in the cards on the table, and Elisabeth quickly used the moment to teach her some basic words and grammar. Later, Elisabeth shared a story about light and fire, explaining that fire is like magic. When the flame goes out, time seems to stop, and people can do whatever they want without consequence. But when the fire is lit again, everything returns to how it was. Louisa listened carefully, but her rebellious behavior continued afterward. In an emotional moment, Elisabeth revealed a harsh truth to Louisa.
You are a woman. If you marry, everything you own will become the property of your husband. If you don't marry, every profession will be closed to you but one. Loneliness and humiliation. They lock you up, Louisa.
As a woman, everything she owns would eventually belong to her husband once she gets married, leaving her with nothing. But Elisabeth emphasized that there's one thing no one can take away from her, her mind. With this revelation, Elisabeth finally broke through Louisa's defenses, winning her over with tough love and patience. Louisa stopped resisting her lessons and began to study. Charles was pleased to see his daughter's progress, and as time went on, he and Elisabeth started developing feelings for each other. At night, Charles would sit by his unconscious wife's bed and share his thoughts, as he had done for years. But this time, he couldn't help but think of someone else, Elisabeth. Meanwhile, Elisabeth also had secret feelings for Charles, the man who had once paid for her. She would watch him swim in the lake, admiring his body through the misty glass, and her growing affection became clear. One night, they met in the study. Charles opened up to Elisabeth about what had happened 7 years ago, hoping she would deny any lingering feelings between them. He wanted to forget the past, but deep down, he knew he couldn't hide the truth from his own heart. When they looked at each other, all the emotions they had been holding back came rushing out.
Everything you said or did is forgotten. More than forgotten.
That night, they allowed themselves to give in to their desires, letting go of any moral restrictions. Louisa, however, witnessed the growing connection between her father and Elisabeth. While walking on the frozen lake, the ice cracked beneath her, and she fell into the freezing water. Elisabeth saw this and immediately jumped in, using all her strength to break through the ice and save Louisa. Though she had been acting as her governess, her actions revealed her true identity as Louisa's mother. As Louisa slept, Elisabeth promised that she would never leave her. As time passed, Louisa started to open up to Elisabeth. She knew the sick woman wasn't her real mother, but still visited her every day. Louisa loved the lake pavilion because it felt like a special place she shared with her real mother. During the winter, Charles's father, Lord Clay, returned. He was a man who loved indulgence and lavish activities, and he hosted a grand Christmas ball soon after his arrival. Charles never enjoyed dancing, but when he was alone with Elisabeth, he couldn't resist putting his arm around her waist and spinning her around the room. After that, their relationship deepened quickly. Sometimes, Charles even thought about running away with Elisabeth and their daughter. But as a married man and the heir to a family legacy, he had too many responsibilities. He couldn't allow himself to think that way. Soon, a group of unexpected guests arrived at the estate, and Charles's business started to fall apart. He had to sell everything to pay off his debts. For 10 years, Charles's wife had been paralyzed, and the estate felt more like a prison than a home. Charles did love his wife, but he had never considered whether she wanted to live like this. For 10 years, he lied to himself, and perhaps unknowingly hurt her too. Tormented, he opened all the windows and doors, leaving his wife exposed to the cold. He prayed to God to look after her as the bitter wind quickly ended her life. Elisabeth had no direct role in this, but she knew Charles had something to do with his wife's death. Just then, Louisa walked into Elisabeth's room and accidentally saw her sketchbook. Louisa finally realized that Elisabeth was her mother. She didn't understand why Elisabeth had given her away, but Elisabeth explained that she had sold Louisa for £500.
£500.
Is that a lot?
It's a fortune.
I'm glad it was a lot.
By the end of the story, they all forgave each other and let go of their past mistakes. The family left the manor in a carriage, ready to start a new life together. This is the ending of the movie Firelight. Life is full of unexpected twists, and it takes time to adjust to these changes and come to terms with our emotions and desires. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.